Hi and welcome back. I'll spare you the suspense. Part of the miracle is that I finally got one of the videos from this series finished. Of course, this was only one of the miracles related to 34 Fairview. All kinds of miracles happened the night of January 29th, 2022, if we believe eyewitnesses Jen and Matt McCabe. Miracles that defy time, space, distance, physics, and of course, logic. This video will cover the first 8 miracles. Let's set the stage for our performance. You know how we were recently talking about how our greatest weaknesses are also our greatest strengths? Well, I am blessed with a toddler and an Amazon addiction, so clearly I am qualified, almost overqualified by Massachusetts State Police standards, to recreate the crime scene at 34 Fairview Road. Since I needed to examine the angles and distance so closely for my replica, it ended up yielding so many observations that I needed to break this up into multiple parts, something that is easier said than done in this tangled web. For the scale of my model, 1 centimeter represents 1 foot. I used public records to establish the lot size and dimensions of the home. From there, it was just a matter of finding the right-sized Amazon boxes and toddler toys. I was the right person for this job. I was practically made for this moment. So what could Jen and Matt see? Short answer, not much if they were truly in the dining room and at the front door, and even less if they were in the living room. As far as I can tell, they likely saw headlights and possibly the glow from the taillights. Now listen, I'm no Microdots. I'm a mom with a microphone and 2 accounts, StreamYard and Canva, and not much uninterrupted time. For most of my previous videos, I've used Google Slides, which is basically just PowerPoint, but I've been trying to enhance the viewer experience by trying to teach myself Canva. So if you'll lower your expectations, I'll try to increase my efforts and hopefully we can meet somewhere in the middle. My goal is to provide basic visualization, so I'm grateful for your patience. Back to why they couldn't see much. Number 1, Jen's vehicle is so tall at 6 feet 5 inches and so long at almost 19 feet, and it was parked so far back in the driveway that it blocked the visibility of the driveway side of the yard from her position inside the dining room. For demonstration purposes, this photo was taken from the new owner's Ring camera at the breezeway door, from the day that a certain former female FBI agent went on a photo spree earlier this year. The Ring camera has a fairly wide field of vision, so the angle is not completely accurate, but it's a good enough approximation. From the formal front door or dining room windows, Jen would have likely seen a partial silhouette of the hood and maybe the windshield of a large vehicle with its headlights on. Could have been Karen, could have been the Nagel vehicle. As Jen self-reported on the witness stand, she's bad at identifying vehicles. She wouldn't have known based on a partial view. Here's a photo taken of Jen McCabe's vehicle in the daytime, parked in essentially the same spot as she claimed from that fateful night. This is from the perspective of Karen's SUV. Can you see the dining room windows and the front door? Not really? Then odds are the people from the windows and door couldn't see much of the vehicle at the foot of the driveway either. Number 2. Additionally, when I was trying to place the shrubs on my replica, I realized that the visibility of the flagpole area from the front door and the windows of the dining room was significantly obscured by the overgrown shrubs flanking the front door. Was it that way in 2022 on the morning of January 29th? Yes. So take a closer look at that visibility. The shrubs were even larger and more unkempt back then. And I am not judging because I get it. You can either have kids or a beautifully manicured lawn, but you can't have both. Despite their near constant self-reported presence at the dining windows and front door, the McCabes couldn't really see to the left, and they couldn't really see to the right. But Grace, what about the front door? Straight out the front door, as Jen mentioned during the trial. That takes us to number 3. I'll need your help verifying if this is a universal experience or if it was just me. But I have a memory in the vault from my childhood. Back when I lived up there, we had a glass storm door just like 34 Fairview. And I would stand near it and eagerly wait for company to arrive for Thanksgiving or Christmas. And the warm air from inside, with all the people socializing, would collide against the cold air from outside, and it would fog up the glass. And then I'd get in trouble for drawing pictures in the condensation. It was kind of an annual holiday tradition. So I'm not convinced that even the straight out the front door view was unobscured, especially since during the few minutes that Karen was at 34 Fairview, there were 2 moments when Jen and Matt definitely were not in the doorway. When Julie Nagel was exiting to see her brother, and when she was re-entering. And that's not a fat joke, it's basic physics. 2 people can't occupy the exact same space at the exact same time. The entryway foyer area is narrow, and it's blocked by those closets, typical of 70s architecture. It's not like there are side lights or anything like you see in residential architecture from the 1980s and 1990s. A standard front door is 3 feet wide, so 36 inches, and this is confirmed by the photo of the foyer. Those are 12-inch tiles, 3 tiles wide and 2 tiles deep. So that helps us to visualize the space. And speaking of visualization, the waterfall video shows us that Matt was significantly more portly during January of 2022 than he was when he testified in June of 2024. So the McCabes would have easily filled up that entry space, especially since the open solid door was also taking up some of the room in that narrow little area. And while we're here, let's take a look at the sight lines. You absolutely couldn't be in what is labeled as the study, the dining room, or the living room and see out the front door. Unless you were at precisely the right angle, you couldn't be in the kitchen or dining room and see out the front door, and chances are, at night there would also be a glare from the interior lights. Even if you were sitting on the staircase, your view would be extremely narrow and limited because of those shrubs. In order to see the most, you'd need to be right up against the glass, fogging it up each time you exhaled. And all the front windows were partially obscured by the blinds and valances inside, so if you were standing, your view would be even more limited. And of course, you need to account for the interior lighting reflecting a glare off the glass windows, obscuring the view even more. But while those are important observations, they open the door to some other strong theories. The travel time between 34 Fairview and 1 Meadows Ave is an estimated 6 minutes in ideal conditions. Driving the speed limit, no weather issues, the traffic lights are timed right, no unexpected traffic, construction, or trains crossing. And if you're familiar enough to know where you're going, any of those variables could impact your ETA. But there's something else too: alcohol. We think of drivers who have been drinking as having impaired judgment, slower reaction times, and reckless tendencies. However, for people with higher anxiety traits, as Karen has demonstrated, even with just a buzz, they often overcompensate by trying to drive even more carefully. They sit up straighter, they open their eyes wider, They drive slower. They count the Mississippis at each stop sign. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. And they check the rearview mirror a bajillion times for the old red and blues, absolutely convinced that they're going to definitely get pulled over. I haven't had a drink in over 11 years, but I used to be that way, hyper alert. Number 4. This is why I believe it took Karen 8 or even 10 minutes to return from 34 Fairview. Less familiarity with the roads and hypervigilance. Even Ryan Nagel testified to indicators of heightened precaution. Karen had her foot on the brake while parked in front of 34 Fairview, and he saw her hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Caution was a reflex for her. If Karen connected with John's Wi-Fi at 12:36, she was probably in his driveway waiting for the garage door to go up a couple minutes earlier. This is supported by the call logs. We know she absolutely could not travel from 34 Fairview to 1 Meadows in under 3 minutes. If Karen was comfortable with calling while driving, wouldn't she start calling from the Alberts and continue all the way home? Why wait until 2 minutes before connecting with the Wi-Fi? I think she waited until she had literally arrived back in the safety of the driveway. Karen begins back-to-back calling John at 12:33:35, placing 11 calls between arrival and entering the house at 12:41. That's the voicemail, which has the beeping of the door to the garage and the clicking of the high heels. So during those 7 minutes, she's calling. She's carefully pulling that big SUV into the garage. And John has those single bay garage doors, which can be so tricky. It's embarrassing how many attempts it takes me to park in the garage, even 11 years sober. And perhaps Karen is staying in the car, in the garage, for the sake of leaving those ugly voicemails, because it's clear that both John and Karen prioritized trying not to argue in front of the kids, even if they weren't always successful. Working backwards, 12:33 minus 8 to 10 minutes is 12:23 to 12:25. But again, Grace, how can that be? That takes us to number 5. Time passes slowly when you're waiting for someone, especially when you're anxious that you've been ditched again, that you're the afterthought again. When you're in your head like that, seconds feel like minutes and minutes feel like hours. So it's reasonable that Karen felt like she waited 10 minutes for John. It's also reasonable that the actual time was much shorter. And because Jen and Matt were anxiously clamoring at the door and windows awaiting John's arrival, time passed slowly for them too. So their perception of time inadvertently corroborated Karen's perception. And if anyone had bothered to interview Julie Nagel that year, she would have likely given the same estimate because her perception of time was probably similar. Standing in the discomfort of bitter cold can also feel like an eternity. These conditions influence our sense of time passing. So Jen called John at 12:29, a call that lasted 8 seconds. But Jen didn't start the barrage of calling and texting until the coast was clear and Karen was long gone. However, and this is critically important, by 12:31, Jen McCabe was already being deceptive. Number 6, pull up behind me was physically impossible. When I tried to recreate where everyone was parked, I could not get 3 cars deep in the driveway safely with any room to spare. Even bumper to bumper to bumper, the third vehicle was too close for comfort to the street. Let's look at the aerial view of the driveway. The length of the driveway is approximately 50 feet, but nobody parks right up against the garage door or bumper to bumper, because then how would the person in the passenger side get over to the house? Matron Nicole Albert testified that they had 4 vehicles: her Cadillac, a Ford Explorer, a Ford Escape, and her husband's, and I'm using air quotes here, work vehicle, which we know is a Ford Edge. Brian Albert testified that he parked whatever family vehicle they returned home in over in the left lane. It appears that his work vehicle might usually be parked in the far right lane, what I refer to as the bonus spot, and you can kind of tell what I mean from the picture. Jen McCabe testified that she was in the middle lane, and this appears to be her usual spot. We all tend to be creatures of habit, whether or not we're willing to fess up to it on the witness stand. The length of Jen's Yukon Denali is 225 inches, almost 19 feet. Place that behind any of the residential Albert's vehicles. It doesn't really matter which one, because by the time you add 2 feet between the garage door and car 1, and 2 feet between car 1 and Jen's Denali, 40 feet is taken up. How much space is left? 10 feet. Karen's Lexus is 16 feet 8 inches long. If Karen pulled in behind Jen and left 2 feet between bumpers, literally half of Karen's Lexus would be hanging out in the street. And the math doesn't work even if Jen tried to claim that she meant to pull up perpendicularly to block her Denali in. How would John open the car door to exit? In my opinion, nobody who owns a $90,000 car is going to park it half-pipped in the driveway of a house they don't know, especially when DPW trucks might be coming by to sand before the storm, or when there might be black ice or another vehicle that could sideswipe them. Just no. But you know how you start to wonder if you're crazy? Like, I can't possibly be the only one seeing this, right? So I reviewed Microdots' video, Look the Other Way, and the link is in the description. And if you look at his renderings, he saw it too. Here's one example, and here's another. But just to be extra triple sure, I located the footage from the dash cam of the first officer on the scene that morning, and sure enough, those 2 left lane cars are still in place, covered in snow, taking up most of the driveway. And then Matt McCabe pulls the Denali into its usual spot, and see how far it's dangling past the other cars? So pull behind me at 12:31 was a lie because there was no room, and also because Karen had literally left the property as much as 8 minutes earlier. Which means, literally, everything after that was a deception too. The 5 text messages that Jen sent to John, the 7 phone calls that Jen placed to John, these were all done in bad faith because Karen wasn't near the flagpole at 12:31, but someone else was. Somebody else was exactly at that flagpole at that exact time because John's phone took a one-way trip that lasted 20 seconds and crossed 83.53 feet in just 36 steps. Somebody else was at that flagpole at 12:31, and that person knows that Karen was long gone. And I don't think it was Jen. I have a strong suspicion of who it was, and again, I may be able to prove it in the next part of the video. And finally, this may seem obvious, but Karen did not pass the library between 12:37 a.m. and 12:39 a.m. The missing library footage was either a timestamp problem or a complete red herring based on the Commonwealth's initial faulty timeline. The Commonwealth has already shown us that they're willing and able to manipulate video footage by changing timestamps and chopping out time and flipping things around to make them inverted. So Karen's vehicle appearing on the library camera would sink their case. They could not let that SUV be shown on film, so they, lost 2 minutes and changed the times of critical events to reflect the timeline based on star witness Jen's timestamps. Proctor might not have even realized that Jen's timestamps were deceptive, because by this point, there were several groups of people being deceptive for their own personal motives. It's possible that they also misinterpreted Karen's 12:55 a.m. text of "I'm going home" as leaving Fairview and heading to One Meadows, when Karen had intended to convince John she was leaving One Meadows and heading to Mansfield. Covering involvement, shirking blame for a shoddy, lazy investigation, misinterpreting and misrepresenting information. It's a lot. Let's recap the eyewitness testimony defying miracles, shall we? Number 1. Jen Denali blocked the view of the arrival of the Lexus. Number 2. The overgrown trees flanking the front door blocked the view of the flagpole side of the property. Number 3. The glass door was likely fogged up and reflecting a glare from indoor light sources. Number 4. Karen left much earlier than anyone has calculated. Number 5. Karen was not lying when she claimed that she waited 10 or 15 minutes for John. Her perception was influenced by the waiting, just like the expression, "a watched pot never boils." Number 6. Pull behind me was physically impossible. There was no space, and Karen had already left. Jen was already being dishonest at 12:31 a.m. Number 7. I think the last truths by the McAlberts were told at 12:21 a.m., which is when John entered the house, and I'm pretty sure that I can prove it in the next video. Number 8. The lost library footage is a red herring in some capacity. I believe the alibi math got crisscrossed between competing cover-ups. At this point, they're all just leaning into their incompetence. So, while it may seem unreasonable to think that, say, 20 people colluded and conspired, it's more reasonable to believe that 2 groups of 10 people colluded to deflect blame from their little group, a network of secret alliances. After seeing what T.A. Morrissey, Brian Tully, the fake victim, and others have been up to, are we really that surprised? They've demonstrated it's not only a possibility, it's a reality. If you found value in this video, please hit the like button so that the YouTube algorithm will promote this to a wider audience. I used to think that that was just something that content creators would say, but after some research, I've learned that it's true. I'll have more observations and miracles for you in the next part of the series, so please double check to make sure that you're subscribed so that you'll be the first to know when the next video drops. And until the next one, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and take care of our community. I love you.